April is Confederate Heritage Month. To remind Neo-Confederates and Lost Cause ass clowns what their heritage is, this page is executing a daily series throughout this entire month, commemorating anniversary events and honoring Southerners who remained loyal to the United States. If you're just coming across this post, make sure to follow the page, as we'll be upsetting Neo-Confederates and Lost Cause bigots all month long. Sarah Melinda Linda Pritchard was born on March 10, 1839. Some sources say 1842. She was born in Alexander County, North Carolina. She became a friend of William Keith McKeeson Blalock. Their respective families were rivals for over 100 years, but despite this, Blalock and Pritchard married in 1861 when she was either 19 or 22. And being 1861, you know what happens next. Linda was initially sympathetic to a state's right to secede, but her husband Keith and his stepfather Austin Coffey, remember that name, were ardent Unionists, even though Keith was personally opposed to Lincoln as president. It's interesting to note that Blalock's opposing views did not affect their marriage, and the two began plotting to escape. Keith was torn on how to do this, reasoning that if he enlisted, Linda would be left behind and at the mercy of politically opposed neighbors. Ultimately, Keith chose to enlist with the Confederate forces, reasoning that he could desert across Union lines, and local secessionists would see him enlisting and leave his wife alone. Unknown to him, however, Linda masqueraded as Keith's brother Samuel and showed up at the unit's first mustering. Linda's enlistment and discharge papers survive as one of the few existing records of verifiable female soldiers, unlike another more famous celebrity of the era who went by the name Maria Juanita Velasquez and was ultimately proven to be a fraud. Both Samuel, or Linda, and Keith were proved to be excellent soldiers. Keith was promoted to sergeant, which he hoped would keep both of them above suspicion for when it was time to desert. Their chance came in April 1862 when their unit engaged a Union regiment and Linda was wounded. In the process, her true sex was discovered. Keith decided to go roll around in poison ivy and claimed he had a highly contagious recurrent illness. There's a lot that goes on here, so we'll just say that eventually, in short order, they were both discharged. However, they weren't quite free yet. The Confederacy, which founded itself on the promise of states' rights and individual liberties for white people, enacted a new draft law ordering soldiers to re-enlist once they were healthy again. The couple fell in with Confederate deserters and ultimately made their way into Tennessee. There, they joined guerrilla partisans and also became guides for the Underground Railroad, which in North Carolina at that time was also aiding Union soldiers who had escaped from Confederate jails. Linda and Keith, still good soldiers, were with the 3rd North Carolina Mounted Infantry, a pro-Union group of volunteers fighting as raiders, and this unit was feared across the entire state and parts of Tennessee and Kentucky. In 1864, Keith enlisted in the 10th Michigan Cavalry Regiment. Confederate vigilantes murdered Austin Coffey and one of Austin's brothers, but 2 other brothers were injured in the attack. Keith tracked down some of the vigilantes after the war and killed them. Keith would also later track down and murder an uncle who joined the Confederacy, because fuck traitors. During the war, the Blalocks participated in a pair of raids against the sympathizer family, whose son was the officer who had initially recruited the Blalocks into the Confederacy. During the first raid, Linda was wounded in the shoulder, not her first wound. During the second one, Keith was shot in the eye and ended up losing it. This wound can be seen in his photo. He would later also lose the use of a hand. After the war, they both had trouble getting their pensions. Linda died of natural causes in 1903. Keith, severely distraught, relocated the remainder of the family. In 1913, he was killed in a railroad accident, which many people speculate was to have been in revenge for wartime deeds. Keith will be buried next to his wife, and his grave unfortunately reads, Keith Blalock, Private 26th Regiment NC Volunteers, Confederate States Army. Reminder that the Confederacy were traitors who betrayed the United States and tried to destroy the Union out of spite. A reminder that heritage, not hate, is lost cause horseshit. A reminder that the lost cause narrative is revisionist history bullshit. A reminder that the South seceded over slavery and economic factors tied to slavery. Also a reminder, the Confederacy was a bunch of traitors who lost, got their asses kicked, and begged to be readmitted back into the Union. P.S. Your flag is a participation trophy. Die mad about it. Hashtag not sorry, not sorry. Unknown to him, however, Linda masqueraded as Keith's brother Samuel and showed up at the artist formerly known as Keith Mookie. What the fuck is your name? Keith would be buried next to his wife, and his grave unfortunately reads his grave.